hang on a minute. I think most of us are pretty ready for 2021. So this is a great way to close out this year. Alaska Outdoor Alliance provides the big tent under which stakeholders in our state's $3.2 billion outdoor recreation sector come together to share viewpoints, solve problems, and advocate for local, state, and congressional leaders for measures and funding with a goal of ensuring that Alaska enjoys the best outdoor recreation economy in the world. So learn more, get news, and get involved at alaskaoutdooralliance.org. I'm going to go straight into our session so we have as much time as possible. So Luc Mehl was born in McGrath, and it seems like growing up in the bush instilled a love for the most remote corners of the last frontier and how best to plan travel to mitigate against the dangers, tread lightly on the landscape, and navigate ice, snow, and rushing glacial rivers. Luc shares his advice, gear recommendations, and stunning images on his blog site, things2lookat.com. So welcome, Luc, and your guests, and the Zoom floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee, for letting us use this time and helping with Alaska Outdoor Alliance. So we had a similar conversation a couple of weeks ago, and as much as possible, I'm trying to not be saying much because this is really supposed to be an opportunity to hear from Sam and Mallory and Emily. I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves. And I've got a few questions that we'll go through, but feel free, everybody else, to use the chat window to have kind of a side conversation and to come up with more questions. But anything's really fair game here, and my motivation for this theme is really just to understand the kind of native perspective on outdoor recreation. I think what I enjoy doing out in the mountains is weird, and I kind of acknowledge that, but it's also like super meaningful, and I love traveling through Alaska's smaller communities and interacting with Alaska natives, and I know that a bunch of the other people that are attending this and the last discussion feel the same way. And the general question is, like, how do I be a respectful visitor into villages, and so that's what we want to get into. If I can have Mallory and Emily and Sam introduce themselves, let's start with that. Mallory, do you want to go first?
Hello, everyone. I'm Mallory Conger. I'm born and raised in Nome, Alaska. I've been adventuring around Nome for basically my whole life. I've seen so many cool places here, and my favorite one my two favorite ones are hiking from Brevik to Wales, which is 75 miles, and kayaking through the Emmerich Basin, which is, I think, 75 miles. I'm not entirely sure, but those areas are the best places that I've been to. And I've been to many other cool places around the United States and Canada. So.
Emily, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, I'm getting a lot of heads nodding and some, I see a lot of beautiful pictures on the screen. Hello to everyone who's listening in on social media. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Edenshaw. I am Yupik and Inupiaq. My family is from Yamanic, Alaska. My grandparents are John and Cecilia Sipri, and my great-grandparents are Pearlie and Axel Johnson. I live and work on the Dena'ina lands as the executive director of the Alaska Native Heritage Center. And I just want to say thank you very much for having me co-present with Mallory and Sam and Lee and yourself. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. In terms of my relationship with outdoor recreation, I would have to say You know, I'm probably the least outdoorsy person on this call today, and that's okay. But a lot of my work really centers around advocacy and education, and I'm really looking forward to what's going to be shared here today. And you know, I just want to say thank you again for having me.
We're psyched that you are here. And Sam.
Shoji Sam Alexander Oji, which is Jego Tanithli got Tananguichi UAF in Chiquichit in. So my name is Sam Alexander. I grew up in Fort Yukon, that's where I was raised. I've been here at the university for a bit. Prior to that time, I was a special forces officer in the Army and served multiple tours overseas. So that's kind of some experience in terms of, I guess, adventure, if you will. It seemed like it was pretty adventurous at the time, I guess. But when I finished that up, I went to business school and got my degree and came back to Alaska and started a business called Latitude 66, where I took college students out on the land. And so we did trips, mostly cross-country trips, skiing, but we do backpacking trips too and canoeing trips as well. So my primary kind of focus has been really getting people not only on the land, but I want them to experience it, you know, kind of through the eyes of Indigenous people and in our relationship to the land, which, you know, sometimes it's different. We see the land a little bit differently. We have a different experience with it, especially since we've been here in the state for so long. And so that was kind of my focus. I teach in the School of Management here at UAF right now, but I still do some work when it comes to backcountry trips and whatnot. So that's been my experience. Thank you.
Sam, maybe we can stay on that thread a little bit. Like, how much demand was there or is there for that kind of service of sharing Indigenous relationships with the land with people that it seems like they're seeking an outdoor, mostly a recreational experience?
I think there's demand for it. It's a challenging thing though. So if somebody wanted to start a business where they were taking people out on the land, I think the big challenge is that reaching individual customers is a tough thing to do. So for example, like if I have a business, I have a website, you go to it, you know, but you'd have to really know what you're searching for to find me. That's just the way search engines work. You know, they call it search engine optimization, so you can optimize your website so people can find you, but it can be pretty tough if that's how you're going to go about finding clients. And so I do think there's a demand, but it's also, people don't know what's possible. They don't know it exists. So for example, if I were to tell you, hey, Luke, I got this trip and you're going to go up into Arctic Village and we're going to go in August and you're going to go and witness the community's caribou hunting. And then you're going to get to take part of it. Obviously, you know, there's rules around you being able to hunt, but you're going to get to take part and see the cultural aspects of it. And you get to stay out at caribou camp for a week. If I were to tell you that, you'd be like, oh, that sounds like an awesome trip. I want to go on that trip. The disconnect is from, you know, the people in the community to you. How do we link you two together? And that's really the great challenge I see when it comes to providing these kind of experiences, because people in the communities, you know, they're going to be out on the land and they're going to be doing these traditional activities, and they have people with them that are inexperienced. I mean, young kids go out, they're inexperienced, and you get that experience on the land. That's what it'd be like taking out some people that have never been out there. But at the same time, you know, they might not have the capacity to be able to reach out and kind of tell that story to the population where it reaches the population that really wants to go on these type of trips. So there's got to be some sort of meeting in the middle. And I think that's kind of the biggest challenge when it comes to actually providing these type of experiences for people.
Well, that makes me think a little bit of you, Emily, with the Heritage Center. And I know you guys do some trainings. Maybe you could tell a little bit about those kind of trainings, and then I'm curious if there's interest and demand in any of the sort of outdoor, like I'm assuming there's some interest in the younger generation in learning some of the these indigenous relationships that Sam's talking about, like native and non-native. Does that fit into your umbrella at all?
It does. And I wrote down what Sam said, like people just don't know what's possible. You know, one thing that I've seen a lot in my work here at the Heritage Center and just working throughout the tourism industry and as well as the cultural tourism sector, which is growing, I want to add, and I really want to commend Lee for really trying to foster, you know, we're all serving the same people to a really large degree. And I think we all have the kind of same end goals where we want to create these really rich experiences, whether they're culturally rich, whether it's bringing them into Denali or getting them on a glacier. You know, we have the same end goal. And but I think through an Indigenous lens, you know, I think it's really important to note that I think oftentimes with these experiences, we just go straight to the solution without having a really collective understanding of what the problem is. And what I mean by that is when we're talking about Alaska in general, and through the context of outdoor recreation as well as tourism, it really we need to have a collective understanding that Alaska is a native place. It is not a white place. Our people have been here for 10,000 years. And there's been not only systemic racism, but ongoing displacement of our native communities, as well as the erasure of our histories and our languages. And so when we're, you know, kind of bringing this full circle, when we're talking about creating these experiences, I would encourage people in the outdoor recreation, as well as people within and throughout the tourism industry, to really understand the power that you have, not only with the experience, but also with your partnerships or your program or your company, knowing that it really is righting a wrong in certain aspects, as well as educating our public. And what I mean by that is, you know, when we create experiences here at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, when we create our programs, we know that it is grounded in the understanding that the knowledge that we're sharing comes from our community. And I would encourage everyone throughout the outdoor recreation community to really find ways to start partnering with your tribes, start partnering with organizations like the Alaska Native Heritage Center, because we can really help educate people, not only through an Indigenous lens, but like I said, there is a lot of misinformation out there, and there's just a lot of information that's lacking. And so when we're talking about these different sectors, whether it's the tourism industry, the cultural tourism sector, or outdoor recreation, I think that there's a lot of, you know, we need to have an understanding of kind of where we're meeting the community at, or our end visitor. You know, they've all went through the same education system that we've all went through. And so we really, in a lot of aspects, we're meeting them at a ground level zero. And so I wanted to share that because I think that's important to note when we're thinking about creating these experiences for our visitors, knowing that, you know, they went through that same education system that we've been through, and there's a huge opportunity to right the wrong. And there are people and tribes that are in operation today that really want to partner in meaningful ways to do so.
And I think there's a lot of people, you know, from my perspective, the people that are, you know, the 50 people that are on this call and the 100 that were on last time, there's a lot of interest to be the respectful visitor and to do this right and to honor native lands and native perspectives. And so I think the fact that there's so much demand in this kind of shows that we don't really know where to start, like where to go, where the resources are. And that feels similar to me to what you've both said so far, that people don't know what is possible. So I'd like to explore that, and I'd like to get Mallory involved. And maybe we can start. Mallory, I assume that what you do feels fairly unique within your peer group, and that might be wrong, but you know, I'm kind of calling you out here because you're the youngest on the panel. And can you talk about that? Like, is what you're doing unique? Like, do you feel like you're inspiring other young people to get outside and to sort of recognize indigenous cultures and relationships with land and with our bodies and the environment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I don't really, I mean, a lot of people around this region know who I am by my reputation of skiing and through my dad that used to work at the Nome Nugget. And they'd say, I'm not really sure what they'd say. I'm outside every day and people see me and they say that it's inspiring for them to get outside more. And it makes me feel happy that I'm getting outside and wondering if I know the question that goes through my head when I'm outside is like, am I inspiring other kids my age to get outside as much as I do? And if so, then that's what matters to me because, it's the land here is amazing. And I wouldn't want to be the only one seeing it. But there are times I'm just like, I wish someone else my age or from the school was here to be able to see what I'm seeing. And with the native land, it's like my dad used to have a company here, like going through the Emerald Basin and to do the past few times we've gone through, we've had to ask the native corporations if we were allowed to go through, even though I'm a part of the native, or I'm native. My dad still respects the land, I can't speak English today, respects the land and still calls to see if we're able to go through. He did the same thing for Brevig to Wales. My dad and his friend had to pay a fee, and they said I was fine without a fee because I was part of I'm a native person. So after that trip was finished, it had a lot of people saying that it was amazing that I did that at the age of 16, walking with 65-pound backpack on my back and walking walking like 5 miles a day or something, with that amount of weight on your back and find on the tundra with a lot of tussocks and the sand, you're trying to find the perfect spot to walk. Is not really fun, but I would someday like to have a company here and be able to take people out in the same areas that I've gone to, because I would like to share the beauty of that with everyone else.
Thanks, Mallory. That was awesome. Sounds like Sam might be a good resource for you when you're ready to start your company. I'm interested in, and I'll get back to the native land part. I'm interested in that too. But it's really cool for me to hear how you are so intentional about wanting to inspire people and to kind of invite people into these experiences that are so meaningful to you. This is probably kind of a hard question, but I kind of feel that way about what I do when I visit the woods and the mountains. So I'm curious if since it's intentional for you, I'm curious if you have like how you're trying to do it. Like, do you have, like, are you always trying to make it seem fun or meaningful or spiritual, or are you posting on Instagram, or is it more like word of mouth in the grocery store? Like, I'm curious if that part is kind of intentional too, like how you're trying to spread your message.
I've posted on Instagram about my adventures and all. And I just, when I'm out there, I'm in the moment. I'm just like, I don't really know how to word it as much. Like when I'm out there, I'm just free and I don't really think about a lot of stuff. And I don't really want to do anything bad to the land that would harm it, or even though it's native land, and I'm still pretty cautious of what I do. So like making sure we're not leaving any trash out there or anything, because it's not right for that to happen, to have natives when they go to that area, or if they do and they see that people have left trash in that area, then it's not, I'm just really cautious of not doing any of that. So
Thank you. So maybe we can talk more about what Emily said about, Alaska is native land, like at this most foundational level. And so maybe Emily or you, Sam, would be interested in talking about, there's some, again, from my perspective, like there's so much federal land and state land in Alaska, like technically. And so it makes it easy to think, the Arctic Refuge is, and in fact, this is part of the pitch that goes to Washington, D.C. Those guys, environmental groups can go there and say, look, this belongs as much to you as it does to me. Like, this is federal land. But it's so different for the communities of Arctic Village or Anaktuvik or Kaktovik. So I don't know if either of you has a perspective on that. Like, what is the native perspective on public land? Like, it surprises me to hear that Mallory, that you guys would ask permission to go walk that section of coast, because there's this outside perspective that the coast is just wild, and what harm does it do for me to walk through there? Sam or Emily, is that enough of a?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and I'll, I hear this question a lot, but I think in a couple different contexts, like what's the native perspective on this? What's, education, or really other polarizing issues like Pebble Mine, or outdoor recreation or public land. So I think oftentimes we are looped into this like one perspective, and I'm not saying any like no insult to you, Luke, but just know that this is something that we often see. And I don't know if Sam would agree. And I know for me and my experience is that I can only speak for, for me, I represent my organization. And the one thing I would say when it comes to, someone's perception or how they feel about it, you're going to see that it's going to look, it's going to vary community to community and person to person. And, I think oftentimes we are looped into this one, like what's the native perspective, when you don't see that with like, what's the non-native perspective on this, because you all have all these very different perspectives. And so I think it's really interesting that we're often looped into this. And I think we need to get away from that and know that for me and how I show up is, if I want to know how that community feels, really spend time with that community or get, working with that community. So for example, if you want to know, in Quinnahock, you're not going to ask, I don't know, Emonic, how Quinnahock feels about XYZ, right? I would say go to that community to really not only learn from them, but build relationship. And that, I think that ties back into that first question of working with, working with the land, or, creating these experiences and working with the Native community. I think it all starts with relationship and the power of relationship, and knowing that, there's been a lot of, I don't want to say harm, but ongoing, like just a misunderstanding and You know, the Native community has been at the receiving end of a lot of unjust policies. And so just knowing that we really have an opportunity right now through the outdoor recreation industry or the tourism industry or the cultural tourism industry to really start building those relationships. And this is something I've often said to Sarah Leonard and to Lee, you know, COVID right now, there's for me and in my experience, I feel like we could reshape what tourism looks like in Alaska. You know, outdoor recreation shouldn't be looped in on the back end. Cultural tourism should not be looped in on the back end. We should be working in partnership. And so going back to your question, I think if you really want to know how someone feels or how a community feels, reach out to them. And if, you know, if there's a community that you don't know who to reach out to me and I can try to find an answer for you, or reach out to the Heritage Center. Because in Alaska, there are 229 federally recognized tribes. And so knowing that out of the 562 tribes in the entire United States, Alaska has the most. So I just want to say there are tribes, there are village councils, there are Native corporations. There's definitely someone that we can get you in contact with. So I apologize for that long-winded answer, but my point is, you know, really reach out to that community to find that answer. And I don't feel like I have the right to say, this is how they really feel about it.
And Sam, I'll definitely let you go here. But I just want to, yeah, I do know better, Emily, than to fall into the Native perspective trap. But I appreciate the reminder, and it's part of my progression. And since I don't know you, I'll just mention I grew up in McGrath, you know, which is a half Native community, and I think I kind of always grew up feeling uncomfortable, like feeling a little bit like an outsider, and I have brought that into my adulthood, unfortunately. And so that's part of me trying to understand this space is to get better at learning and changing my own perception. So that is super useful for me to hear, and probably for a bunch of the other participants here. Okay, Sam, can you take over?
Yeah, so I appreciate what Emily said about, you know, the perspectives, and there's a lot of different tribes up here for sure. You know, there are a lot of different tribes, and we have different perspectives on. I think the question I heard from you, Luke, is you're saying, how do we as Native people see public lands? And I could speak for myself and my experience as Gwich'in person. You know, the Gwich'in, we see ourselves as a nation, and we're beyond the borders of just the United States. We also are into Canada as well, into the Yukon Territory and the Northwest Territory. And so we're pretty united in many of the things that we do and believe. One of the things that I've seen growing up is that we don't really, you know, this idea of public land, like, for example, I went out moose hunting this year. I was up on the upper part of the Porcupine. And to me, when I get out to that part of the land, or when I'm out there on the land, to me, it's all Gwich'in land. And I don't make a distinction between the federal government's land or the state's land, or even like Doyon, the corporation, the regional corporation's land. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm on their land, I need to do this. I behave like it's all Gwich'in land, all of it. I don't make a distinction. The time I make a distinction is when I'm on a different tribe's land. So, for example, like, I'm not going to go out to like Imanic. Somebody asked me one time, because they knew I run trips, and they're like, boy, you know, I think I've heard the Noatak is a real nice area. You ever think about running trips out there? And I told them, I said, that's inconceivable to me. It's inconceivable as a Native person that I'd go to another Native person's land and like run adventure trips on their land. You know, even though it might be like public land, there's no way I would do that. And no Native person is going to do that. Like, that's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable for me as a Gwich'in person to go to somebody that's like Yupik or Nupiat or the, you know, Koyukon or whatever, and go on their land and do trips. I ask permission to go on their land when I go out. Like, if somebody said, hey, Sam, we want you to run this trip on Noatak, I'll say, I'm going to go through the same process that you should be going through, which is contacting those communities and getting their permission for me to be out there. Even though, like, legally speaking, I could probably just go out there and do whatever the hell I want, I'm not going to do that, because that's disrespectful to those people. You know, I know people think when they look at, like, especially like Anwar, and they look at the refuge, you know, they think, oh, this is all pristine wilderness. and it should be left alone. But the reality is that we've, been there for thousands of years, and we've been all over the place, and we have names for all these places. And even though you might not know that that mountain has a name because it's not named in a map that you have, we have those maps internally and we have them named. And so it's not public in the sense that like it's a place that we always want to share with everybody equally. I think it's a hard thing that I see this. If you ever want to know, if you ever want to see racism in Alaska, just go to the ADN and look at any comment section where there's any story about Native anything, because it always devolves into this comments about Native people in our relationship to the federal government. The reality is this, is that we have a different relationship with the federal government than non-Natives do. That's just law. That's federal Indian law. And you got to recognize that. People are like, well, why should Natives have this special relationship? I'm like, listen, before you came, we owned all of this. We've been around a lot longer than the United States has, that's just a fact. And so kind of the perspective that I take is that wherever you go, you're on Native land. You need to recognize that, even though if it says federal government, it doesn't matter. You might think that you have equal access. You could throw up camp anywhere you want to. You can't, and you shouldn't. You should be respectful and talk to those people that live in those areas. Because at the end of the day, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be on this land long after there's a United States. We're going to still be here. And we have to always clean up after people that come into our communities or travel along our lands. I see it on the Yukon where people just do whatever they want. And the thing is, we always have to bail them out when they get stuck or something bad happens. 50 below. Hey, you shouldn't go out. It's about to get cold. It's about to turn 50 below. No, they're going to go walk and do what they want to do. A couple days later, got to go search for them and pull them out, even though it's 50 below. Still danger for us. Still got to go get them. And that's the reality, man. And so when you think about it, I don't know. I don't think it's public lands like people say it's public lands. That's just Sam Alexander opinion.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah,
This is
Emily?
Emily again. I just want to add to what Sam was saying about mountains having a name, and the map is internally, internal to us and shared through stories, intergenerationally. And that's something that we often say here at the Heritage Center. We were born of songs and dance. That's if you want. I was just in a meeting the other day where we, when we think about Western versus traditional, and we're all, as Native people, I'm living in a Western world, right? And I have this traditional knowledge that's running through my veins, and I'm learning it every day. And I realize that, and it was brought up in a meeting the other day that our youth that are going through our education system, they're kind of put in a position to be analyzing Shakespeare and Marx and, these other philosophers. Why are we not analyzing our songs and our dances and our stories, and going back to the relationship between, and bringing it back to this meeting today? There is a huge deep connection between outdoor recreation and education, and I'll keep on saying that until I'm like super annoying, because it really, really is. And the one thing I would say when we think of the context of tourism, for the Native community, it's way more than just data and number of visitors. It's the perpetuation of our languages. It's the, seeing the empowerment in our youth's eyes and their voice and their cultural connectedness to who they are and to their community. And, I can share about the data. There's so much data that's available about cultural tourism in the nation, and when we think about when people experience cultural tourism, they stay longer and they spend more money. And, if it's successful for us, if it's winning for us, then it's winning for you, and vice versa. And why wouldn't we be doing that in Alaska, right? Why not? So I think conversations like this are really important, because historically, the Alaska Native community has been left out of the conversation. When you look at Alaska in general, when we've been marketed, it's been a very geographical experience. It's come see Denali, come see a glacier, come be with the brown bears, come fish. It's not, this is an indigenous place. And so I'm sharing that because I think it's really, you know, as leaders within your industry, you need to understand the system that you're working within and the system we are trying to change. It is not broken. And I hear that all the time, that, you know, the tourism industry is not broken. I say that it's working the way that it's intended to. And just like any other system, there's racism. And so I wanted to share that, you know, that is something that we say here at the Heritage Center, that, you know, our stories and our knowledge are passed down, and to really gain an understanding is to work with the Native community. And it's so much more than data and numbers. So I apologize for that, but I wanted to make sure that I shared that.
I have, you guys are saying so many things that I want to keep in my brain that I'm struggling to. But I, like Sam, what you just said about that perspective on public land is so different than where I've been coming from, you know, for the last 15 years, where Alaska is this amazing playground, and it is amazing, and it is not trivial, it's meaningful. So I think it is really valuable to hear your perspective. And a common theme for what you just said and what Emily said is kind of like this missing link in communication. And so that makes me, so right now you've got 30 people, and Mallory can share this, you know, on kind of some take home points, and I can share this like on our social media feeds or whatever. So what's the message you want to convey to this audience of people that love Alaska for their own reasons, and don't know as much as they could about the indigenous cultures, but want to? And you've all been saying ask, you know, just ask. And so maybe that's the message, but can you direct us a little bit here? Like, yes, Sam.
You're in luck, Luke, because I happen to teach at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we have, here's the thing, is that there are programs here in the state. I mean, if you wanted to learn to speak, and you know, I'm not Yupik, but if you want to learn to speak Yupik, you can learn to speak Yupik here. You know, if you want to learn to speak Inupiaq, you can learn to speak Inupiaq here. If you wanted to learn to speak Gwich'in, you can learn to speak Gwich'in here. And so, you know, there are resources available. You know, when I was in the Army, one of the things that you have to do in Special Forces is you know, you have this regional alignments, okay? So think about the entire globe, all right? The entire globe is broken down into different regions for the military, and same thing for Special Forces. And so my Special Forces group, of course, there's one that actually kind of covers like the Arctic area, but the Army said, no, you're going to go to the desert one instead, because that makes the most sense, because I grew up in the Arctic. So the one I went to was 5th group, and that was for the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. And so I got to study Arabic. And so that's what we did. They sent us to Arabic school, and I had to learn, you know, to read and write Arabic. And you know, I don't speak very well anymore, but you know, I spent, I think, 5 or 6 months in the language. And so I learned, I read the history, I learned the language, and then I was out there with the people, and, you know, we learned their customs and cultures. And you know, I would go out there and meet with sheikhs and eat the food and live the life that they lived. And, you know, that's not always possible for people to do that, because it's pretty challenging to go to these communities and be out there and really embrace it in that way. I mean, like, you know, for the amount of places you've been to, Luke, you'd speak like all 20 indigenous languages here in Alaska. There's a lot of languages to know. But traditionally our people, Native people, knew multiple languages. You got to remember that. Like, we weren't just in one spot living like a static life and never interacting with the other groups. That's not the case at all. Like, there are Gwich'in people that spoke Inupiat, they spoke Koyukon, they spoke, you know, Degaton, they spoke Upper Tanana, Lower Tanana, they spoke Han, they spoke, you know, you name it, they spoke it. Anything on the peripheries and beyond, they would know the languages. So there are opportunities. You got to inform yourself about these things. I mean, the university is a great place to start. There's something called the Alaska Native Language Archive. So you can go there and look if you want to see the languages and the recorded materials in the languages, you can go there. The university is a great resource for learning about Native people. And I, even myself, I've learned quite a bit since being here at the university, being exposed to the research that's out there. Like, for example, I read the other day, here's one, this is for everybody in the group, you're gonna get a kick out of this, is that nobody knows where the name Yukon comes from. Which is, you're like, wait, how is that possible? In 1845, a guy named John Bell came down the Porcupine River with the Hudson's Bay Company, and he said he met two Gwich'in people, and they told him the name of the river is the Yukon. And so he recorded that, and that's what Hudson Bay called it. The Russians were on the other end, and they called it the name that the Yupik people called it. So where does this name Yukon come from? Well, it's not a Gwich'in word. So we're like, well, wait a second, you're saying we came up with it, but we never heard this before. So this is something I'm looking into, right? But there's a lot of history in the state that, is from before we were a state or a territory or even owned by the United States or owned by Russia, if you will. And that stuff is available for you to look up and read. A great resource, if you're in the interior, is Hudson Stuck is a guy, if you don't know his name, you should know his name. His name is Hudson Stuck. And Hudson Stuck was the first person, he took the first successful team up Denali in 1913. But he did a lot of other things besides climb Denali, all right? He wrote several books, and it talks about his travels all through the interior in the western coast of Alaska, and I think he even went up to like Utqiagvik and beyond, over towards Kaktovik. So he's a great writer. Read what he has to say. There is no reason why you shouldn't know your history. Like Emily said, we're responsible. We're, Native people. We have to know like about Shakespeare, and we have to know about all this other stuff, the Odyssey and the Iliad and all that stuff. We got to learn that because we're expected to know this Western culture. You're here in Alaska, you should know Native culture, and there's no reason why you shouldn't.
Emily or Mallory, do you have any sort of asks for this captive audience along those lines? And I'll just mention I can share a couple of book names with like via, I don't know, a YouTube thing or something at the end, because I found a couple of books that I really enjoyed, including some of Stuck's stories.
Sure, I'll go if that's okay, Mallory. I have a couple notes. I think we've all inherited an experience, a way of doing even before my time, of whether if it was my grandparents or my ancestors, we've inherited this. And the one thing I'm really thoughtful, like I am Native, I am also white. And I am like not interested in like, kind of perpetuating any sort of like bashing of like, we're better than you, or this is better than that. That's not a Native value, and that's one thing I want to make sure that everyone knows, that, a Native value is for us to be working in partnership, and you learning from us and us learning from you. And, something I tell our youth, because a lot of our youth in Alaska are, they're victims of a system. There's no state in our country that has a 10 student minimum like Alaska. And that really feeds into outmigration. That feeds into youth being funneled into more urban areas, and they're displaced from their land, and there's an impact to language because our language comes from our land. And, so what I tell our youth is, you are Native wherever you go. And I want to share that this is kind of an operating principle in what I share with our youth. And I'm meeting you with this understanding, and based off my own experience, that I'm not here to bash anyone. I'm not here to put anyone down. I want you to know that I am very solution focused. And not only am I Native, I am also white. And I realize that being in both worlds, I want to show up as my full self to every conversation. And but with that, I have a responsibility, just like many of you have a responsibility to learn the history of the land that you're on. And, in any room that you're in, whether if it's another outdoor recreation meeting or a room with, the tourism industry or in a funder, one thing I would just say is Like I tell my youth, don't ever shrink yourself in that meeting. You have something to offer. You have an experience that matters, and our world needs to hear it. And know that the responsibility that I carry is that I know that if there's something that is not right, I speak up. And so that would be one thing that I would share with everyone on the call, is understanding the responsibility, not only to understanding the history of the land that you're on, but also the people that you're trying to work with. Another thing is just understanding the system that you're working within. Alaska is often referred to as this last frontier. It's even on our state's website, right? When we say it's the last frontier, it perpetuates a narrative that there was nothing here before contact. That needs to stop. We've been here for 10,000 years. And this is where I'm saying that is not, again, an example. You have inherited that. This is part of our lived reality today. So these are the systems that we are trying to change. And so when you're going to these meetings, understanding that you're part of this, this system that I think in a lot of ways people say it's broken, but it's not broken. So we have a responsibility not only to learn the history, working with the community, but also understanding the systems that you're working within. Also knowing when it comes down to policy and funding. Our state does not spend one penny on cultural tourism. Because of Lee's activism and her work, I think that we are now trying to advocate for a position at the state level with outdoor recreation. We need to continue doing more of this. Why is it that our state gets millions of dollars for funding with tourism, but it's not funded? There's no line item, not one penny is spent on cultural tourism. And like I said, it's moving in the direction of getting a position hired for outdoor recreation, but there are inequities that exist. So no wonder Alaska is marketed the way that it is. No wonder we don't have as many tribes or positions that are working with or companies working with the tourism industry. There's no funding behind it. So I would say understand not only through, I guess, through a through a qualitative lens, but also through a quantitative lens, knowing where the funding comes from and the policy that impacts that. In terms of really being solution focused, look at other countries that are working with, or states that have Indigenous communities. Canada is doing a lot of great, they've been doing programs between not only with like outdoor recreation, but even at the federal level, there's a partnership between their public lands and tribes through their Watchman program. There are Indigenous communities all over the world. And I think if you, to make it a very micro or through a very focused lens, I would really encourage you to look at maybe Hawaii or New Zealand or Australia or Lower 48, Navajo Nation, seeing what is working down there and seeing how we could apply it here in Alaska. Because anywhere you go, there's going to be Indigenous communities. And I think, just going back to that understanding is just, part of really, when you learn the history, and just know that, like I said, you went through the same education system that I went through. I graduated, I didn't have a thorough understanding of Alaska Native history, and I'll own that. And I'm the leader of the Alaska Native Heritage Center, but I have that responsibility now to really, we've identified that problem, but now we have to find the solutions. I am less interested in continuing to admire the problem. And I'll just say it. I want to find the solution. I want to partner with organizations, because I don't want to have 20 years from now the same, asking the same questions. And I've seen it through my PhD work. They're asking the same questions today that they were 20 years ago. And I don't want to do that. And so just know that there are a lot of resources out there, both at a national, international level, but also at a local level. Here at the Heritage Center, we have classes called Cultural Awareness Workshops. If you'd like them for your company, reach out to me. We're doing virtual CAWs. If you have questions, like, is it appropriate for me to say this versus that? know that we're here as a resource. I'm not going to bash you. My staff will not bash you, you know, knowing that, like I said, you went through the same education system that we went through. And so we're not going to fault you for that. But now you have an understanding and an awareness. And so we have that responsibility to make it right. And so those are the few things that come to mind. I have a whole list of others, but I'll let Mallory talk.
And before Mallory, before you go, I'll just make a quick comment that for participants that are maybe new to some of the terminology that Emily is using, specifically about like this, the inherent systemic racism, Will and I, Will's a coworker and friend of mine that's on this call. We worked through a book in the Gwich'in lands of the Brooks Range this summer called Me and White Supremacy, and I'll paste a post to it. And it sounds like we should make a little book list that comes out of this. So I'll follow up with people on that. Mallory, do you have some asks for this captive audience?
With me being only 19 and in college, I still understand. I mean, I've had respect for native land. We're always out there, like summer, fall, winter, and spring, a lot in the spring. We go out downhill skiing. There is one mountain on the Teller Road called 3870, and there was this elder. She passed away. I don't remember when she passed away, but she gave us permission that we were okay to go on the mountain on 3870. And I know last spring, one of the someone from the corporation that we know said we were allowed to go on 3870. And you know, there is a road that goes to 3870, but we don't, it goes old or close to the base, but my dad is still respectful of the land, and when we're up there we can see Imrook Basin, and if it's it was a clear day that day, we could see King Island and Cape Prince of Wales. But you know, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what else to say.
That's okay. Sorry for putting you on the spot. Sam, did you have something to add? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. You know, I wanted to say something regarding something that Emily was saying. Recognize, I would say recognize that outdoor rec, you know, it's, well, one, it's awesome. We all like it. That's why we're all here, because we enjoy it. And, you know, I love getting out on the land. I like to see people get out on the land. I don't worry, you know, my wife is from Miami and she loves to ski, you know, and so we, you know, it doesn't matter where you're from. We like to see people out on the land and enjoying it. So that's important. But, you know, one of the great things about having, you know, Native people run these businesses is that when you're running this business, you get to do what you were raised doing. Like, for example, you know, if I wanted to, it'd be cool, and I've been working on this, figuring out how to do this, is taking people out with me when I have my fish camp in the summertime and I fish, and you come out with me, you know, and jump in my boat and we go check fish net and we go cut up fish afterwards and dry it. And it's an opportunity for me to make money while also engaging in this cultural activity. And that's the thing, that's the challenge that we have as Native peoples, that, you know, here I am teaching at the university, I teach in a business school, I'm not teaching stuff that's my traditional ways. You know, to reinforce and to make our traditional ways, to strengthen our traditional ways and keep it relevant, we have to be doing them. We have to spend the time doing them. And that means to be on the land. And so a person could be on the land and make money at the same time. That's a real powerful thing. You know, we talk about language preservation, we talk about our cultural preservation. That only occurs when we're out there actually doing it. And so if you can have cultural tourism where you're engaging and doing traditional activities and getting paid to do that because you're taking people with you, that's extremely powerful. And that is, if you want to support Native people, that's one of the best ways to support Native people, in my opinion. You know, the other thing is, you know, I've mentioned this before, but in terms of mindset, I think, you know, people ask, how do I be a good guest? That's always the question I think Luc is always asking me, is like, how do I be a good guest? How do I be a good guest? You can be a good guest by not being a burden. Don't be a burden on the people that you're going to. Like, you show up asking for things. That's what always happens in the communities. They're like, people show up and they're real cheap. I've noticed that. They don't want to spend a damn dime in the villages. They're like, you know, I understand backpackers can be cheap people, but don't go to the village and be real cheap, all right? Don't be afraid to, you know, spend some of your hard-earned money out there. You know, people are like fairly real tight with it. They want to spend a dime. You know, they want to camp for free and go do all these other things for free. I'm like, hold up, you know, just throw a couple bucks out there. Not going to hurt you. So I just wanted to say that.
Luc, I just want to say one more thing. I think, you know, I think oftentimes I might be like, you might be an angry Native woman, or, you know, I'm labeled, you know, by me saying these like really hard truths. But I feel like in order for us to move forward, we have to hold a mirror up to ourselves to have an honest look and ask why. And like I shared when I initially opened, you know, I think we often just go right to the solution without really understanding what the collective problem is. And I think in Alaska, when we talk about the outdoor recreation industry, tourism industry, cultural tourism industry, you know, I don't think that there is a collective understanding. And my role as a leader in the state, we need to find ways to do that. We need to have more spaces like this where we're having these honest conversations, so we can move forward and we can make the difference. And so I just want to share that I'm not, you know, bashing the tourism industry or you know, I serve on the ATIA board, but we need to have these conversations. We need to be partnering in ways that is really beneficial to our state. And the reality is this is the way it's been happening. So, you know, I really want to commend Lee for reaching out to me and asking me to be on here, and just know that I believe that we, if we continue to work together and partner, you know, we will create the change that our communities, Native and non-Native, need. So thank you.
I know we're out of time here, and Lee has some closing thoughts, but I just want to share mine real quick, which is that in the spirit of partnership that Emily is doing such a good job of emphasizing, just to let everybody on the call really know that there are so many resources within this community, really through Lee. So thank you, Lee, for organizing this. There are a bunch of guides and instructors. I see Bradley Cruz, who's a board member of Ski-Coo, which is, you know, getting kids on skis. So as far as this being a two-way partnership, Sam, Emily, Mallory, if you need help getting gear, this is a community that can help do that on your next big adventure. And I really appreciate your contributions today. Thank you so much. And I guess that's it, Lee. I'll let you wrap it up. You're still muted.
Well, thank you, Luc, Sam, Emily, and Mallory. I certainly appreciate you sharing with us today, and all of our participants, your insights. I learned something, you know, I've learned things both times that Luc has held this, and actually all of our lunch and learns, to be honest. But I too, I think like many people that are participating in this today, really want to try and be the people that start doing this better and start being, you know, helping be the change that will really help us truly reimagine a different future for Alaska's outdoors and the tourism sector and all of its components. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you to the participants for showing interest in being here today for this session. It is the last session of 2020. And again, a fantastic way to end this this Lunch and Learn series for this year. Come back next year. We're going to be doing a little bit more to deconstruct and unravel where some of the challenges and opportunities are within the state and within the state structure and funding, and some master planning things that will take place that you can all participate in to really have a role in helping move things in new directions. So have a fantastic holiday, stay safe and healthy, and surround yourself with love and family. And I hope to see everyone back next year. Thank you.